The crowbar hit the brick wall 6 inches from Mira's head. Not an accident. A warning. Mira had 3 seconds before the collector's crowbar stopped being a threat and became a promise. She didn't run. Running was for people who hadn't already lost everything once. She stood with her delivery bag on her shoulder and did the only thing her brain knew how to do under pressure. She counted 6 black sedans. 12 doors opening at exactly the same moment. One man stepping out who adjusted his silver cufflink like the alley was a boardroom and the rain was scheduled. She noticed the charcoal smudge on his thumb before she noticed anything else. The mark of a man who still balanced his own books by hand. That detail felt important in the way small details always feel important just before everything changes. The collector looked at the sedans. Then at the men in dark coats. Then at Sebastian. He made a fast, quiet decision and disappeared around the corner without a word. Sebastian walked toward Mira slowly. He didn't rush. Men who controlled rooms never rushed. He stopped close enough that she could see his eyes, dark, unreadable, the eyes of someone who had already run the numbers and didn't like the answer. Mira Sloan, he said. His voice was quiet. That was worse than loud. Forensic accountant. Currently hiding behind a florist apron and $34,000 of someone else's debt. He tilted his head slightly. Or so you want me to believe. Mira said nothing. Her fingers tightened around the stems of the white lilies. Your accounting signature appeared in my books 3 weeks ago. Not your name, a pattern. The same structure you filed under your old firm before someone burned it to the ground and left you holding the debt. He studied her face for a reaction. Someone planted your fingerprints in my ledger, Miss Sloan. I came to find out if that someone is standing in front of me, or if we have a problem in common. He stepped back and nodded to the 2 men on his left. You're going to come with me and explain that. Now. It wasn't a question. The 2 men moved to either side of her. The sedans idled. The alley offered nothing in either direction. Mira looked at the lilies in her hands. At the blocked exits. At the man already walking back to the center car without waiting to see if she would follow, because he already knew she had no choice. She followed. She would learn later that Sebastian Kim had not lost a single negotiation in 11 years. Not because he was the most powerful man in Oakvven, though he was, but because he never arrived anywhere without already knowing the outcome. The only variable he hadn't calculated that night was her. The elevator climbed high above the tech district, its glass walls turning the city below into blurred streaks of neon and rain. Mira stood perfectly still. In the reflection she looked like a shadow in her black dress, still holding the white lilies because no one had thought to take them. The guards on either side of her said nothing. She counted the floors instead of thinking about what waited at the top. When the doors opened she was led into an office that felt more like a cage of glass and steel. Sebastian sat behind a heavy desk. Outside, the rain smeared the city lights into watercolors against the glass. He didn't look up at first. He was staring at a small wooden frame sitting on the corner of his desk, something faded and quiet that had no business being in a room built for money and precision. Mira stepped closer. Her heels clicked on the polished floor. Before he could move she saw the picture. It wasn't a yacht. It wasn't a boardroom or a trophy or a skyline. It was a dusty grocery store on a poor street, the paint peeling at the corners, a hand-painted sign barely visible above the door. It looked like something a person keeps not because it makes them proud but because it reminds them why they can never afford to lose. Sebastian's hand came down on the frame with a sharp snap, turning it face down. His eyes met hers, dark, controlled, the eyes of a man who had spent years learning to delete his own origin story before anyone else could use it against him. The ledger, Mira, he said, his voice smooth as silk over gravel. My team says the numbers are flawless. Profits are up. Every cent accounted for. He turned the leather-bound book on the desk toward her. They call it a masterpiece of business. Mira didn't look at the screen of the laptop sitting open beside it. She didn't need to. She had spent the entire drive up doing what she always did under pressure, running the logic quietly in her head, tracing the architecture of the numbers, feeling for the place where something human should have been and wasn't. She reached out and touched the edge of the leather cover. "You're right," she said quietly. The hum of the computers filled the room like a held breath. The math is perfect. Every decimal in its place. Every cent walking in a straight line. She leaned forward until her own reflection appeared in the glass surface of his desk. Her voice stayed steady. Her eyes stayed sharp. "That's how I know it's a lie." She looked up at him. "Real people make mistakes, Sebastian. They get tired. They forget to carry a one. They round up on a Thursday because it's been a long week." She pushed the ledger back toward him slowly. "This was written by a machine. And whoever programmed that machine knew exactly what they were doing, because they knew exactly how you think." The rain hit the windows hard. Sebastian didn't move. The powerful, calculated man behind the desk of steel and glass looked, for just a moment, like the boy who used to stand behind the counter of a dusty grocery store watching his father trust the wrong people. He was afraid. Not of Mira. Of the possibility that she was right. The charcoal smudge on Sebastian's thumb was still in Mira's mind when her phone buzzed. She hadn't forgotten the grocery store photo either, the way his hand had moved so fast to hide it, like a reflex, like shame. But the name on her screen erased every thought. Leo. Sebastian watched her with narrowed eyes, his hand still resting on the face-down photo. Mira stepped away from the desk, her heart hammering against her ribs. She swiped the screen and pressed the phone to her ear. On the other end, the wind was howling. She could hear the heavy thud of Leo's boots hitting the pavement in Oakvven. He was breathing too fast, the sound of a boy trying to stay brave in the dark. "Mira? Are you there?" Leo whispered. His voice was shaking. "I'm here, Leo." "Slow down. Tell me what's happening," Mira said, her voice dropping to a low, steady command. Sebastian stood up slowly. He adjusted his dark suit jacket and signaled to the two guards by the door. "My team is already moving," he said, his voice cold and professional. "They are the best in the city. They can be at the dorms in 5 minutes. Just give them the word, Mira. Let me protect him." Mira looked at the men by the door. They looked like statues, strong, but loyal only to the man who paid them. If she trusted Sebastian's security, she was giving him the leash to her brother's life. But if she used her own shadow tactics, the hidden contacts she had kept secret for years, she might be too slow. She had to choose between a powerful lion or a hidden fox. "Stay on the line, Leo," Mira said, ignoring Sebastian's reaching hand. She moved toward the glass window, looking out at the rain. "I'm sending help, but you have to stay in the light. Do you see anyone?" There was a long pause. Mira could hear the sound of a car engine purring in the distance, a low growl that didn't belong in a quiet college town. "Mira," Leo gasped, his voice cracking with fear. "There's a black sedan parked right outside my dorm. It's been idling there for 3 hours. The windows are too dark to see inside." "They aren't yours, are they?" Mira felt a cold chill run down her spine. She looked at the black cars in the street below, then back at Sebastian. The trap was closing, and she wasn't sure who was holding the key. Leo was safe, for now. Sebastian's man had reached the dorm in 4 minutes, not 5, and that single minute was the only reason Mira was sitting in this boardroom instead of running. She owed Sebastian something she didn't have a name for yet. She filed that debt away and focused on the room. A long, dark table stretched across the room, and 12 powerful men and women sat in leather chairs. Mira sat at the end of the table, dressed in a sharp suit. To everyone else, she was just a high-paid consultant brought in to check the books. To Sebastian, she was the only person who knew the truth about the machine-made ledger. The air smelled like expensive coffee and nervous sweat. A man named Mr. Henderson was speaking about growth and profit, his voice loud and confident. Mira watched him. He was the one who had signed the offshore papers. He was the mole, the person feeding information to the enemies outside. Mira didn't wait for him to finish. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. It was a coded message, just a few numbers that only she and Sebastian would understand. As she stood up to hand a folder to Sebastian, she let the note slip onto his lap. Sebastian didn't blink. He leaned back in his chair, his face like stone, but his fingers traced the numbers on the paper. He looked at Henderson, then back at the note. He played it cool, nodding as if he were simply bored. But Henderson saw the movement. He saw the way Sebastian's eyes sharpened. The mole realized he had been caught. Henderson's face went pale, and he suddenly pushed his chair back, the metal leg scraping loudly against the floor. He tried to turn toward the door, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Sebastian didn't stand up. He didn't raise his voice. He simply looked at Henderson the way a man looks at a door he has already decided to close permanently. "Sit down, Mr. Henderson." The two guards by the exit moved before Henderson's chair had stopped scraping. That was the difference between authority and power. Authority needed words. Sebastian only needed to shift his weight. The security guards moved toward the door, blocking the exit. Henderson froze, his hand shaking as he reached for his briefcase. The rest of the board looked confused, but Mira stayed focused on Sebastian. She leaned over the table, her voice steady and clear. She didn't talk about profits or math anymore. She spoke a single name, the name of the secret company that had been stealing their data. The room went completely still. Sebastian's hand gripped the edge of the heavy table until his knuckles turned white. He looked up at Mira, his eyes burning with a dark, dangerous fire. "Say that name again, Mira," he whispered, his voice trembling with a mix of rage and shock. "Very carefully." Henderson was shaking. But the name Mira had spoken, the shell company bleeding Sebastian's empire dry, wasn't Henderson's creation. Henderson was a middleman. Someone had built this architecture long before Henderson ever signed a single paper. Someone who knew Sebastian's system better than Sebastian did. Someone who had designed it. Henderson was gone. The name Mira had spoken still hung in the air like smoke. She watched Sebastian stand at the window, his reflection ghosted in the rain-streaked glass, and understood for the first time that being right had cost him something. His hand moved to his cuff. The cufflink snapped. It hit the floor and rolled to her feet like a question she hadn't been asked yet. Mira walked over and picked it up. She didn't say anything. She stepped close to him, into his personal space. Usually, Sebastian would pull away, but this time he stayed still. Mira took his wrist in her hand. His skin was cold, but his pulse was fast. She worked carefully, using the small silver pin to lock the metal back into place. For a moment, the cold mask he always wore slipped. He wasn't the scary CEO or the man who controlled the city. He just looked like the boy from the dusty grocery store photo. He looked lonely. He watched Mira's fingers as she finished the task. He didn't move his arm away even after the cufflink was fixed. The air between them felt thick, like the mist outside the window. "You could have left," Sebastian whispered. "When you saw the black cars, or when you found the ledger. You could have run away." Mira smoothed the fabric of his sleeve. "I don't run," she said softly. "And I don't leave things broken." Sebastian looked at her for a long moment, the kind of looking that had nothing to do with checking facts. Then he glanced away, jaw tight, as if he had almost made a mistake he couldn't afford. He reached past her for the rosemary sprig she had left on the ledger. He didn't ask what it meant. He already knew. Rosemary was for protection in Oakvven's old flower market language. It was also for remembrance. She hadn't decided yet which meaning she intended. Maybe both. I have spent my whole life making sure no one could hurt me, Sebastian said, his voice cracking just a little. He leaned in closer, until Mira could see the fear in his dark eyes. If I'm wrong about you, Mira, I'm already a dead man. The safe house smelled like dust and someone else's old life. Mira sat close to the window, not because of the view but because it was the farthest point from Sebastian. The cufflink moment had left something in the air between them that neither of them had addressed, and the professional distance felt necessary and dishonest at the same time. That was when she noticed the fern. She walked over and touched the soil. It wasn't dry like she expected. Instead, the dirt was soaked and muddy. Water was pooling in the bottom of the ceramic pot. Someone had been watering this plant every single day, but they weren't doing it to keep the fern alive. They were overwatering it to hide something in the heavy, wet mud. Mira reached into the leaves. Her fingers brushed against something hard and cold that didn't feel like wood or root. She pulled her hand back, and between her fingers was a tiny, black plastic disc. It was a high-tech listening device, a bug hidden right in the heart of the dying plant. Sebastian stood up quickly, his face turning pale. "Is that from Henderson?" he asked, his voice shaking. "Was the mole listening to us this whole time?" Mira didn't answer right away. She pulled a small tool from her bag and cracked the plastic casing open. She looked at the wiring and the tiny glowing light inside. She had seen this kind of tech before, and it didn't belong to a corporate spy. The frequency was locked, and the signal was encrypted with a special code. She plugged the device into her own handheld scanner. The screen blinked, tracing the signal across the city map. It bypassed the mole's office. It bypassed the rival tech companies. It went straight to a high-security building on the other side of town. "This isn't Henderson's work," Mira said, her voice barely a whisper. She looked at the phone number flashing on her screen. The bug wasn't transmitting to the mole. It was a direct line to the Oakvven police commissioner's private cell. Mira set the device down carefully, as if it were made of glass. If the commissioner was listening, he had heard everything: the ledger, Arthur's name, the gala plan. They weren't just racing against the mole anymore. They were racing against the law that was supposed to stop him. The realization hit them like a physical blow. The law wasn't trying to catch the mole, they were watching Sebastian, and they were listening to every word they had just said. They didn't sleep. There was no conversation about the commissioner. What would they say? That the city's top law enforcement officer was on the wrong side of the bug? They sat with that knowledge like a stone between them and worked faster. By 3 a.m, Mira found what she had been looking for without knowing it. Mira sat at the small table, her fingers flying across the keys of her laptop. The light from the screen made her eyes look like glowing embers in the dark. Sebastian stood behind her, his breath heavy. He watched the lines of green code scrolling down the screen. To him, it was just math, but to Mira, it was a story. She stopped at a specific block of data. She pointed to a tiny error, a small loop in the code that looked like a handwritten signature. It was a very clever mistake, one that most people would never find. But Mira had seen this pattern before. She knew the person who thought this way. It was the same digital handwriting she had hunted for years. "Look at the way the code hides itself," Mira said, her voice trembling. "It doesn't just delete files. It replaces them with fake ones so you never know anything is missing. There is only one person who teaches this style." Sebastian leaned over her shoulder. His eyes widened as he recognized the logic. "That's Arthur's method," he whispered. Then the full weight of it hit him. He straightened slowly, the way a building settles before it falls. "Arthur didn't just teach me this business, Mira. He gave me this business. Every contact I have ever closed, every lieutenant sitting in that boardroom, every contract this empire runs on, they were all Arthur's first. I thought he handed it to me because he was proud." His voice dropped to almost nothing. "I never once asked myself why a man builds an empire and then gives it away smiling. I never asked what he was really handing me to hold. Sebastian went very still. Not the stillness of shock, the stillness of a man who had survived long enough to know that the first reaction is always the wrong one. He walked to the door, opened it, and said 2 words to the guard outside. The guard left immediately without asking why. That was the difference between a CEO and Sebastian Kim. CEOs explained themselves. Henderson had talked. That was what the 2 words to the guard had been about. By morning Sebastian would know exactly which files Henderson had passed to Arthur and when. Henderson hadn't even lasted until dawn before deciding that loyalty to Arthur was worth considerably less than his continued freedom. Mira turned in her chair to face him. The rain outside had stopped, leaving a heavy, thick silence in the air. She reached out and touched the ledger on the table. The truth was finally out in the open, and it was uglier than either of them had imagined. Arthur hadn't been protecting Sebastian. He had been building a trap for years, using Sebastian's own success to hide his crimes. He didn't just pick you because you were smart, Sebastian, Mira said. Her voice was cold, filled with a pain that went back a long way. She thought of the dusty grocery store photo and the life she had lost before she ever met him. She realized now that their paths hadn't crossed by accident. They were both targets of the same man. The $34,000 debt had never been real. Mira understood that now. Her old business partner hadn't run to Lisbon with her name on the paperwork by accident. Arthur had found him first, had paid him to disappear and leave the debt in Mira's name. A fabricated liability designed to put her in financial danger at exactly the right moment. The collector in the alley hadn't been chasing a real debt. He had been a key turning in a lock Arthur had built years before. The moment that crowbar hit the wall 6 inches from her head, the door had opened exactly the way Arthur needed it to. Sebastian's team had been tracking shell company activity in that district for 3 weeks. Arthur knew their patrol radius. He had put Mira in that alley like a photograph in a frame, positioned perfectly for Sebastian to find her and draw exactly the wrong conclusion. She looked Sebastian straight in the eye, and for the first time, her mask of calm was gone. He didn't just steal your money, Sebastian. He stole my entire life. And now, he's coming for the rest of yours. Arthur's name changed the temperature of every room after that. Mira watched Sebastian process the betrayal the way she had once processed her own, not with tears but with a terrible, quiet reorganization of everything he thought he knew. She recognized it because she had worn that same face for 2 years. She didn't say anything. Sometimes the most honest thing you can offer someone is silence and proximity. Outside, the city was covered in a thick neon mist that turned the windows into glowing sheets of blue and purple. Sebastian sat on a worn-out couch, staring at the floor. He had taken off his suit jacket, and his white sleeves were rolled up. For the first time, he didn't look like a powerful boss. He just looked like a man who was lost. Mira sat across from him, resting her chin on her hand. She watched him closely. "Why do you still do it?" she asked softly. "You have hundreds of people to manage your money. But I saw you. You still spend hours every night balancing the books yourself. Why?" Sebastian looked up, his eyes reflecting the soft neon light from the window. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small, framed photo he had turned over earlier. He set it on the table between them. It was the dusty grocery store again. "My father owned this shop," Sebastian said. His voice was low and shaky. He was a good man, but he wasn't good with numbers. He trusted the wrong people. He believed their smiles instead of checking their math. One day, the numbers didn't add up, and he lost everything. The bank took the store, and he died with nothing but debt. He leaned forward, his hands clasped together. "I promised myself I would never let that happen to me. I learned to love the math because it was cold and honest. A 4 is always a 4. It doesn't have a hidden plan. It doesn't pretend to be your friend while it steals your life." He looked at the digital ledger on the laptop, the one Mira had proven was a lie. The light from the screen cast long shadows across his face. Everything he had built was based on the idea that math was the only thing he could trust. Now, that foundation was crumbling. He realized that Arthur had used his love for numbers to blind him. "I didn't choose the numbers because I wanted to be rich," Sebastian whispered, his voice cracking in the dark room. "I didn't choose the numbers. The numbers were the only things that never lied to me. Until now." Neither of them moved for a long moment. Outside, the loop train clacked by, shaking the window frame softly. Mira realized she had stopped thinking of the exit. She wasn't sure when that had happened. Before she closed her laptop, Mira pulled up the commissioner's public schedule. He was attending the Oakvven Hotel Gala tomorrow night. The same event. The same room. The trap they were setting for Arthur would also have the law's top official watching from the inside. She turned the screen toward Sebastian without a word. He looked at it for 3 seconds, then nodded once. They both understood. The gala had just gotten significantly more dangerous. The violins reached Mira before the elevator doors opened. She stood in the gold-framed mirror of the lobby and barely recognized herself, the gown, the stillness, the woman looking back who had stopped running. Sebastian appeared beside her reflection without a sound. He looked at her the way he had looked at the ledger the first night, like something he was trying to calculate and couldn't. "You look like you belong here," he said quietly. "Don't," Mira replied. But she didn't move away. High above, massive chandeliers hung like frozen rain, casting a bright glow over the crowd. Everyone was dressed in expensive silk and black ties, smiling and talking as if the world were perfect. Mira moved through the room like a ghost in a shimmering gown. She kept her head high, but her eyes were constantly moving, scanning the faces of the city's most powerful people. Sebastian stood near the center of the room, playing the part of the successful CEO. He shook hands and laughed at jokes, but Mira saw the way his jaw stayed tight. Underneath his sleeve, he was wearing the cufflinks she had fixed. It was their secret signal. The plan was in motion. They were here to find the final link between the police, the mole, and Arthur. Mira walked toward the balcony to get some air. The mist from the city crawled up the glass walls, making the lights outside look like blurry stars. Suddenly, a shadow moved behind her. The air filled with the heavy, sweet smell of expensive cigars. She didn't have to turn around to know who it was. It was the man who had been watching from the darkness since the very beginning. The mole stepped up beside her, leaning against the cold stone railing. He didn't look like a criminal, he looked like a friend. He held a glass of dark liquid and smiled, but his eyes stayed as cold as ice. He leaned in close, his voice a low whisper that crawled into her ear. "You play your part very well, Mira," he said, his breath warm against the night air. "You and Sebastian look like a perfect team. You really think you are helping him win this game?" Mira kept her face calm, but her heart began to race. She thought of the rain-soaked alley where her journey had started, and the way Sebastian had appeared out of the fog to offer her a new life. She had always believed that moment was her lucky break. The mole let out a short, dry laugh. He looked at her with pity, as if she were a child who didn't understand a simple math problem. "Tell me something, Mira," he hissed, his grip tightening on his glass. "Did you really think Sebastian was the one who rescued you from that alley?" He smiled and straightened up. Across the room, Mira saw a silver-haired man in a military-cut suit watching her from beside the bar. He wasn't holding a drink. He was holding a phone. The commissioner. He gave her a single, slow nod, the kind that meant he had heard everything, and was waiting to see what she would do next. The mole's words were still crawling through her ear. "Did you really think Sebastian was the one who rescued you?" She needed to know what that meant, but Leo's face on the screen pushed every other question aside. Some answers could wait. Her brother could not. But the answer had already landed somewhere in her chest like a stone dropping into still water. Arthur had sent the debt collector to that alley. Arthur's planted signature had brought Sebastian to find her. Arthur had engineered the entire first night, the crowbar, the sedans, the ledger on the desk. Sebastian hadn't rescued her. He had been delivered to her. They had both been pieces on Arthur's board from the very beginning. The only move Arthur hadn't predicted was that the two pieces would stop playing his game and start playing their own. Mira stood on the balcony. Her phone buzzed once. A video file. No sender name. She opened it and her blood went cold. Somehow they had found him again. Sebastian's protection had not been enough. Arthur's reach was longer than either of them had calculated. It showed Leo sitting in a chair in a dark room. He wasn't crying, but his face was white with fear. The black sedan she had seen earlier was parked just outside the window in the background. The mole stood next to her, puffing on his cigar. He looked out at the city lights like he owned them. "It is a very simple trade, Mira." His voice was calm, which made it even scarier. "I have something better than money. I have the original documents, every forged signature, every fabricated audit trail, that prove your old firm's collapse was my work, not yours. Delete those files and I hand you back the 7 years I took from your life. Leo goes home tonight. You wake up tomorrow with a clean name. The real one. Not the one you have been hiding behind flowers and white lilies." He paused, letting that settle. All that history. All that pain. Gone before sunrise. All you have to do is press send. Mira felt a cold sweat on her neck. She looked through the glass doors at Sebastian. He was standing alone now, his hands in his pockets. He had seen the mole talk to her. He knew something was wrong. He walked out onto the balcony, the cool night air blowing his hair back. He didn't look at the mole. He only looked at Mira. Mira's phone was in her hand. The screen glowed with the data that could destroy Arthur's empire and send the mole to prison. Her thumb trembled above the send button. She had two choices and no clean version of either. Send the files, and Leo was in danger before Sebastian's team could move. Delete them, and Arthur walked free, the commissioner stayed corrupt, and every person they had framed before Mira got framed again after her. There was no right answer. There was only the answer that revealed who she actually was. The mole smiled, holding out his hand as if he were waiting for a gift. Think about it, Mira. Why protect a man like Sebastian? He's just a CEO. Leo is your blood. Mira looked at Sebastian, searching for an answer. She wanted him to tell her what to do. She wanted him to be the boss and make the hard choice for her. But Sebastian just stood there, his face unreadable. He didn't move to stop her, and he didn't tell her to push the button. He trusted her completely, which felt like a heavy weight on her shoulders. The choice is yours, Mira, Sebastian said quietly. His voice was steady, but his eyes were sad. Who do you want to be? Mira's thumb hovered over the screen. The world seemed to stop moving. The rain began to fall again, hitting the glass like tiny bullets. She had sent the files. The moment her thumb hit send, Sebastian had moved, one call, for words, and Leo was in a car heading somewhere safe before the mole had finished his next sentence. She hadn't asked how Sebastian had known what she would choose. She was starting to understand that he had known her longer than their timeline made sense of. The gown felt heavy by the time she reached the loop station. The air was cold and smelled of damp concrete and old electricity. A single train rattled by on the tracks above, casting long, flickering shadows across the platform. Mira walked slowly, her footsteps echoing against the high ceiling. She still wore her gown from the gala, but it felt like a costume from a life she had already left behind. In the middle of the station, sitting on a hard wooden bench, was Sebastian. He didn't look like a man who had just lost a war or won a fortune. He sat with his back straight, his eyes fixed on the bright screen of his laptop. He wasn't looking for her, and he wasn't checking the exits. He was typing with steady, even movements. He was working with the same quiet focus he used to balance his father's books. As Mira reached the bench, she stopped. The silence between them was heavy, filled with all the secrets they had shared and the ones they still kept. Sebastian didn't look up. He didn't ask her about Leo or the money. He simply reached out and slid a second laptop across the bench toward her. Mira sat down and looked at the screen. It wasn't a bank account or a file to be deleted. It was a new ledger, a clean one. The digital handwriting was different this time. It wasn't Arthur's clever traps or the mole's messy lies. It was a map of every dollar Arthur had ever stolen, hidden in a way that only a master of numbers could find. The commissioner made his choice at the same moment Mira made hers. Arthur had something on him, had kept him controlled the same way he kept everyone controlled. When Mira sent the files, it gave the commissioner the one thing Arthur had never given him. A way out that didn't require betraying what was left of his integrity. Sebastian closed his laptop halfway and looked up. "The police are at Arthur's house now," he said. His voice was calm, but it held a new kind of strength. "And Leo is safe. My own team found the sedan before the mole could even finish his cigar." Mira looked at him, surprised. She realized then that while she had been making her choice, Sebastian had been making his. He hadn't just watched her, he had been clearing the path for her to be whoever she wanted to be. He wasn't the man who needed to be rescued anymore. "Everything is here," Sebastian whispered, finally looking up. His dark eyes were tired, but they were clear. "The math is finally honest, Mira. No machines. No lies. Just the truth." Mira placed her hand on the laptop. Then she placed it over his, briefly, the way she had held his wrist to fix the cufflink, certain, deliberate, saying the thing that neither of them had found words for yet. Sebastian looked down at her hand, then up at her face. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. The ledger between them was finally honest. The debt was settled. But the ledger, she looked at Sebastian's profile in the flickering neon light of the station, at the charcoal smudge still faint on his thumb, the ledger was just getting interesting.